I had sworn off women. It was a solemn, internal vow made in the wreckage of my dorm room, surrounded by the shrapnel of my first real relationship, a ripped photograph, a box of returned sweaters, and the ghost of a perfume I could no longer stand. For 6 months, I had been an island, fortified by cynicism, and a library of depressing modernist literature. My heart was a locked room, and I had swallowed the key. So when she spoke to me, her voice a low murmur against the monotonous drone of Professor Albright's lecture on post-war economic policy, my first instinct was to build the walls higher. The lecture hall was a cavern of beige and bad lighting, smelling faintly of damp coats and collective boredom. It was the kind of academic purgatory where time seemed to stretch and thin until it was meaningless. I was doodling spirals in the margins of my notes, a futile attempt to stay awake, when the whisper cut through the fog. "This is soul-crushing. Want to leave?" I turned. The girl next to me was a stranger. I'd seen her before, of course, a recurring background character in the theater of my university life. She had dark, wavy hair that fell across her face as she leaned toward me, and her eyes, even in the dim light, were a startling, clear shade of green, like sea glass. She was chewing on the end of a pencil, and there was a smudge of graphite on her cheek. My entire defense system, meticulously constructed over half a year, registered her as a threat. A beautiful, quiet, and therefore particularly dangerous threat. "Leave?" I whispered back, my voice tight with an indignation I didn't entirely feel. It's the midterm review, it was a lie. It was a lecture on tariffs. I didn't care about tariffs. She gave a small, conspiratorial smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but made the corner of her mouth twitch. "Exactly. He's just reading from the slides. We could be doing literally anything else, and it would be a better use of our time. We could be counting the ceiling tiles," she gestured upward with her pencil. "I already did. There are 288. My carefully curated misery was a fragile thing. It required constant maintenance, a steady diet of isolation and grim determination. This girl, with her graphite smudge and ceiling tile statistics, was an anomaly. She was a crack in the beige facade of my day. I should have said no. I should have turned back to my notes, retreated to the safety of my own head, and let the moment pass. It's what the new me, the sensible, wounded me, would have done. But the old me, the one who existed before the wreckage, was a creature of impulse. A small, traitorous part of that girl was still alive, and she was tired of being bored. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Fine. But if he asks, you're the one having a medical emergency." Her smile widened, and this time it was real. It lit up her whole face, and I felt an unwelcome flutter in my chest, a moth bumping against a window pane. "Deal," she said, already starting to gather her things with a quiet efficiency. She moved with a certain grace, her worn canvas bag and sketchbook sliding into her arms, as if they were extensions of her body. I fumbled with my own bag, my heart starting to beat a little too fast, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was a mistake. This was a deviation from the plan. I was breaking my own rules for a girl whose name I didn't even know. As we slipped out of the heavy side door and into the echoing silence of the empty hallway, the muffled voice of our professor fading behind us, I had the distinct and terrifying feeling that I had just stepped off a cliff without checking to see if there was water below. The hallway was cold and silent, a stark contrast to the droning warmth of the lecture hall. It felt illicit, like we were truants from a life we were supposed to be living. Her name was Maya. She told me as we walked, our footsteps the only sound in the long, sterile corridor. "My name is Chloe," I offered, and the exchange felt strangely formal, like a business transaction for a crime we had just committed together. "So Chloe," she said, her voice softer now without the need to whisper. "What's our grand escape plan? What monumentally important task are we performing instead of learning about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act?" I shrugged, pulling my jacket tighter around myself. The guarded part of me was back in control, reasserting its dominance. "I don't know. This was your idea." Fair enough, she didn't seem offended by my curtness. She just shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and kept walking. "There's a coffee shop a few blocks from here. They have armchairs that are probably older than our professor, and they don't mind if you just sit for hours. Sound okay?" "It's fine," I was a master of the non-committal. It was a language I had perfected. "Fine. Okay. Sure." Words that built fences. She didn't try to fill the silence as we left the oppressive concrete building and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The sky was a flat, pearly gray, and the wind was sharp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant rain. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She walked with her hands jammed into the pockets of her oversized olive green jacket, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something only she could hear. I noticed the details my brain had been trained to ignore, the way a few strands of her dark hair caught the light, the worn-down heels of her boots, the silver ring on her thumb. My mind catalogued them against my will. The coffee shop was exactly as she'd described. It was warm and dim, filled with the rich, earthy smell of roasted coffee beans and old books. Shelves crammed with mismatched paperbacks lined the walls, and the armchairs were deep, sagging behemoths of faded floral fabric. We found a pair in a secluded corner, a small, scarred wooden table between us. I felt a pang of something uncomfortable. This was too much like a date. It was a word I hadn't allowed into my vocabulary for months. This was not a date. This was an escape from tariffs. She ordered a black coffee. I ordered a tea with so much milk and sugar it was barely tea anymore, a childish comfort I refused to give up. When the drinks came, we sat. The silence stretched. I busied myself with stirring my tea, watching the milky liquid swirl, a meaningless vortex. I could feel her watching me, and the weight of her gaze was unnerving. It wasn't predatory or judgmental, it was just observant. Patient. It made me feel exposed. "You're a lit major, right?" she asked finally, her voice gentle. I looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "You were reading Virginia Woolf before class started last week." To the lighthouse, she took a sip of her coffee. "And you have the perpetually haunted look of someone who spends all their time analyzing metaphors." A small, reluctant smile touched my lips. It was the first genuine one I'd felt in days. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," she admitted, her own mouth curving in response. "I'm in art history. We have the perpetually paint-stained look of someone who spends all their time trying to justify their life choices to their parents." There was a dry wit to her delivery that caught me off guard. It was another crack in my armor. I found myself wanting to know more, a dangerous curiosity. I tried to suppress it. "So you're an artist?" I asked, gesturing toward the corner of the sketchbook that peeked out of her bag. "I try to be." She pulled it out and laid it on the table, but she didn't open it. Her hands rested on the cover, her fingers long and graceful. There were faint smudges of ink and charcoal under her nails. My eyes fixated on them. It was such an intimate detail. I imagined those hands holding a piece of charcoal, the soft scratch it would make against paper. The thought was so vivid it made my stomach tighten. I took a sharp sip of my too-sweet tea. "What do you draw?" I asked, my voice a little strained. "Anything. Everything." Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the gray sky was darkening. "People, mostly. Buildings. The way light hits a fire escape at a certain time of day. I'm trying to get better at capturing things before they disappear." There was a quiet intensity in her words that resonated with me. I too felt like I was trying to capture things, memories, feelings, but my method was to lock them away, to dissect and contain them until they were inert. Hers seemed to be an act of preservation, of reverence. The difference felt profound. We sat in another comfortable silence, but this one felt different. It wasn't a void I needed to fill, or a wall I needed to maintain. It was a shared space. The rain began to fall then, soft at first, then harder, drumming a steady rhythm against the cafe window, blurring the world outside. It felt like the city was dissolving, leaving just the two of us in this warm, dim bubble of coffee and quiet conversation. I should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in a long time, I felt something treacherously close to calm. The rain turned from a steady drumming to a relentless downpour, trapping us in the cafe. What started as a 1-hour escape from a lecture bled into 2, then 3. The light outside softened from gray afternoon to a deep, bruised twilight, and the lamps inside the coffee shop cast a warm, golden glow on Maya's face. The forced proximity should have made me antsy, eager to retreat to the familiar solitude of my room. Instead, I found myself sinking deeper into the worn armchair, a strange reluctance to leave coiling in my gut. She finally opened her sketchbook. She didn't make a show of it, just flipped to a clean page, and began to draw, her pencil moving with a fluid, confident motion. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept being drawn to her hands, to the way she held the pencil, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She was drawing the old man sitting near the counter, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his flat cap pulled low. She wasn't just capturing his likeness, she was capturing his weariness, the slump of his shoulders, the way he held his mug with both hands as if for warmth. "You're good," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Really good." She looked up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thanks. It's mostly practice." She paused, her pencil hovering over the page. "It helps me listen. When my hands are busy, my brain actually pays attention to what people are saying." "Is that why you were drawing in Albright's class? You noticed that?" She seemed surprised. "I noticed things," I said, and immediately regretted it. It sounded too intense, too revealing. I tried to backtrack. "I mean, it's a boring class. Not much else to look at." She smiled, a knowing, gentle smile that made me feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. "It is a boring class," she agreed, letting my clumsy save go. "But sometimes the most boring places have the most interesting details, you just have to look for them." We talked. It was easier now, with the rain as an excuse, and the shared conspiracy of our truancy as a foundation. I learned that she grew up in a small town upstate, that she had 2 younger brothers, and that she came to the city because she wanted to be surrounded by art to breathe it in. She spoke about painters I'd never heard of, about the emotional weight of certain colors, the silent story a single brushstroke could tell. She was passionate, but in a quiet, steady way, like a river that runs deep. There was no desperation in it, just a calm certainty. I, in turn, offered up carefully curated pieces of myself. I talked about my love for books, for the way a sentence could be constructed so perfectly it could break your heart. I talked about growing up in the suburbs, the suffocating sameness of it. I did not talk about Amelia. I did not talk about the 6 months of ecstatic highs and crushing lows, the arguments in public, the tearful reconciliations, the final, brutal implosion that had left me feeling hollowed out, a building condemned. Amelia was a ghost who haunted every room I was in, and I refused to introduce her to Maya. As she sketched, I found myself watching the fall of her hair, the curve of her neck when she looked down at the page. Her scent was subtle, something clean and earthy, like sandalwood and paper and the cold, fresh smell of the rain she'd walked through. It was a scent that felt grounding, real. My mind, a traitor to my vows of solitude, began to wander. I wondered what it would be like to touch her hair, to see if it was as soft as it looked. I wondered what it would be like to trace the line of her jaw with my finger. These thoughts came unbidden, sharp and vivid, and I felt a jolt of panic. It was a feeling I recognized, a dangerous precursor to the fall I had sworn I would never take again. "You're quiet all of a sudden," she said, her eyes still on her drawing. "Just thinking," I mumbled, taking a large gulp of my now cold tea. "About what?" The question was direct, but her tone was mild, without pressure. I could have given 100 evasive answers. Tariffs. Midterms. The rain. But looking at her, at the genuine, open curiosity on her face, the lies felt cheap. The truth was a wild animal I kept caged, but a small piece of it slipped out. "About how easy it is to misread things," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She finally looked up from her sketchbook, her green eyes meeting mine. She held my gaze, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and that patient, observant gaze felt like it was seeing right through the flimsy walls I'd built. It saw the locked room and the swallowed key. "Or," she said softly, her voice a low counterpoint to the drumming rain, "how scary it is when you think you might be reading them right." Her words landed in the center of my chest with the force of a physical blow. It was as if she had reached across the table, past all my defenses, and touched the very core of my fear. The air in the cafe suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspoken understanding that was more intimate than any conversation we'd had. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I had come here to escape a lecture, and instead, I had stumbled into something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. The rain showed no signs of stopping. We were still trapped. And I was no longer sure if I was trapped with a stranger, or if the stranger was the person I had been pretending to be for the last 6 months. The moment stretched, held in the space between us. Her words hung in the air, and I had no defense against them. She had seen my carefully constructed fortress, and hadn't tried to storm the gates. She'd simply pointed out that I was the one standing guard. It was disarming. I broke eye contact first, looking down into the dregs of my tea, as if they held some profound answer. I should probably go, I said, the words feeling like a lie. The rain was still a torrential downpour, a solid sheet of gray against the windows. There was nowhere to go. In this. She gestured with her pencil toward the window. You'll be soaked in seconds. I don't mind the rain, another lie. I hated being cold and wet. She watched me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she closed her sketchbook with a soft thud. My apartment is only 2 blocks from here. It's small and my roommate is out of town, but it's dry. We can wait it out there. I can make you a proper cup of tea, not this lukewarm stuff. My internal alarms shrieked. An apartment. An invitation. This was a clear escalation, a step across a line I hadn't even realized we were walking. The safe public space of the cafe was one thing, the intimate, private space of her home was another entirely. No. Absolutely not. The word was on the tip of my tongue. Okay, I said instead. I didn't understand my own compliance. It felt like my body was acting of its own accord, bypassing the frantic commands of my brain. As she packed her bag, I felt a dizzying sense of inevitability, as if I were being pulled along by a current too strong to fight. She had an extra umbrella, a big, sturdy black one, and we huddled under it as we ran through the deluge. The streets were slick and reflective, the city lights bleeding across the wet pavement. Under the umbrella, our little world was small and close. Her shoulder brushed against mine. The scent of her, sandalwood and rain, was stronger now, more present. My pulse, which had just started to calm down, kicked up again. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick walk-up. The hallway smelled of dust and old wood. She fumbled with her keys, and for a moment, standing so close behind her in the narrow space, I could hear her breathing. It was steady. Mine was not. The apartment was, as she'd said, small. But it was wonderful. One large room served as a living area and studio, with a tiny kitchen tucked into one corner, and a loft bed built over a desk. Canvases of all sizes were stacked against one wall, some finished, some just barely started. Sketches and photographs were tacked everywhere. The whole space felt lived in, creative, and deeply personal. It was a space that told a story, and it was a story I desperately wanted to read. It smelled like her, but with an added layer of turpentine and oil paint. It's a bit of a mess, she said, shrugging off her damp jacket. Make yourself at home. Tea. I just nodded, unable to speak, and wandered over to the wall of canvases while she busied herself in the kitchen. The paintings were incredible. There were cityscapes, moody and atmospheric, and portraits that were so full of life they felt like they could speak. In many of them, I recognized a theme, capturing fleeting moments. A woman's face half hidden by a curtain, a blur of subway lights, a single, perfect red leaf on a wet sidewalk. She painted the world the way she described it, as a collection of beautiful things on the verge of disappearing. I saw a portrait of a woman with fiery red hair and a challenging stare. There was a raw, painful intimacy to it. Was this a commission? I asked, my voice soft. Maya came back with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to me. Our fingers brushed. The contact was electric, a tiny shock that shot up my arm. No, she said, looking at the painting. Her expression was complicated. That's Claire. My ex. The words landed like stones in my stomach. Claire. My ex. Of course she had an ex. A beautiful, fiery ex she had immortalized on canvas. My carefully constructed narrative, that I was the broken one, the one with the baggage, and she was the calm, centered artist, crumbled. She was just as human as I was. She had history. She had ghosts. The painting is intense, I said, not knowing what else to say. We were intense, she said with a wry, sad smile. It didn't end well. I keep it up as a reminder. Of what? That you can love something with your whole soul, and still have it not be right for you, she said simply. She looked from the painting to me. And that you can't capture people. They aren't moments. They change. Or they don't. This was the reciprocity I hadn't known I was waiting for. She had offered a piece of her own brokenness, a story that mirrored mine in its pain, if not in its details. She was trusting me with her hurt. It was a bridge built between us, spanning the chasm of our silences. Amelia, I said, the name tasting like rust in my mouth. It was the first time I had said it aloud to anyone but my therapist. Her name was Amelia. Maya just nodded. She didn't ask for details. She didn't offer platitudes. She just stood beside me, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm that was suddenly raging inside me. We looked at the portrait of her ghost while I thought about mine. The tea in my hands was hot, the ceramic warming my cold fingers. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but in here, in the quiet, messy truth of her apartment, something had shifted. The walls around my heart didn't fall, but I could feel them becoming porous. I could feel the world starting to seep in. And I could feel her, standing next to me, seeping in most of all. We stood there for a long time, the silence filled by the hiss of the radiator, and the relentless drumming of the rain. It wasn't an awkward silence anymore. It was a shared quiet, weighted with the ghosts of Claire and Amelia. Looking at the portrait Maya had painted, I could see the conflict, the passion, the anger, and the love all warring in the brushstrokes. She hadn't just painted a face, she had painted a relationship. I'm sorry, I said finally, turning away from the canvas to look at her. That it didn't end well. Me too, she gave a small shrug, a gesture of acceptance. But it taught me a lot. About what I want. What I need, her eyes held mine, and the implication was clear. She wasn't just talking about the past. She moved away then, creating a space that I both craved and regretted. She gestured to a small, slightly lopsided sofa. Sit. Please. I did, perching on the edge of the cushion. The apartment, which had felt so wonderfully bohemian and artistic just moments before, now felt incredibly intimate. Every object seemed to hold a piece of her. The stack of art books on the floor, the half-finished mug of coffee on her desk, the soft, worn quilt thrown over the back of the sofa. I was an intruder in her life, a stranger who had skipped a lecture and ended up in the very center of her world. She sat in one of the armchairs, the one from the cafe, I realized, but a different one, this one her own. She curled her legs up under her, holding her mug in both hands. The gesture was so casual, so comfortable, it made my own rigid posture feel absurd. I tried to relax, to lean back into the cushions. So, she said, her voice gentle, coaxing. Amelia. She said the name without any of the pity or morbid curiosity I'd expected. She said it like a fact, a piece of my history she was willing to hold. And for some reason, that made it possible to talk. She was my first everything, I began, the words feeling stiff and rehearsed at first. First girlfriend. First love. First, well, you know, I risked a glance at her. She just nodded, her expression open and encouraging. I thought she was the most amazing person I'd ever met. She was funny and smart, and she made me feel like I was the only person in the world. I talked. The story tumbled out of me, a torrent I hadn't realized I was holding back. I told her about the beginning, the intoxicating rush of it, the feeling of being truly seen for the first time. Then I told her about the cracks that started to show. Amelia's jealousy. Her possessiveness disguised as passion. The way she would pick fights, just to enjoy the intensity of making up. She needed everything to be a drama, I said, my voice growing thick with unshed tears. If things were calm, she thought it was boring. She thought it meant I didn't love her enough. So she'd create storms. And for a while, I thought that was what love was. I thought it was supposed to be this exhausting, all-consuming thing. I paused, taking a shaky breath. Maya was listening with an unnerving stillness. She wasn't just hearing the words, she was absorbing them. The end was bad, I continued, looking down at my hands. She told me I was too quiet. Too boring. That I was like a room with all the furniture covered in white sheets. That I was holding back from her. The words still stung, a fresh wound. The worst part is, I think she was right. I was holding back. Because I was terrified of her. Of the storms. When I finished, the silence returned. I felt raw, flayed open. I had just handed this virtual stranger the most painful part of my recent life, and I braced myself for the inevitable response. The pitying look. The awkward, I'm sure you'll find someone else, the empty platitudes. Maya did none of those things. She set her mug down and leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. She wasn't right, Chloe, she said, her voice firm, cutting through my haze of self-doubt. You weren't holding back. You were protecting yourself. There's a difference. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, hot tracks on my cold cheeks. I tried to wipe them away, embarrassed and angry at my own vulnerability. Hey, her voice was soft. She had moved from the chair to kneel on the floor in front of me. She was so close now I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. She didn't touch me. She just waited. It's okay. And then, a moment happened. It wasn't a grand, cinematic gesture. It was small, almost imperceptible. She looked at my hands, which were clenched into fists in my lap. And then she looked at my mouth. Her gaze lingered there for just a second, a fraction of a heartbeat, but it was long enough. The air between us crackled, suddenly charged with a different kind of energy. The comforting intimacy we had been building twisted into a sharp, piercing tension. It was a recognition. A silent acknowledgement of the pull that had been humming beneath the surface of our entire afternoon. My breath caught in my throat. Every nerve in my body was suddenly awake, screamingly aware of her proximity. The smell of her, the warmth radiating from her body, the intensity in her eyes. The entire world contracted to the few inches of space between our faces. This was the precipice. This was the moment where I could pull back, retreat to my fortress, and pretend this never happened. Or I could lean in. My gaze dropped to her mouth. Her lips were soft, parted slightly. I imagined what it would feel like to close that distance. The thought was so powerful, so terrifyingly wonderful, that it sent a shiver through my entire body. She saw it. I know she did. A flicker of something, understanding, desire, maybe both, crossed her face. This was the turn. The point of no return. The afternoon had started as an escape from boredom, but it had become something else entirely. It had become a choice. And I had no idea which one I was going to make. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the palpable hum of possibility. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Maya was still kneeling before me, her presence a steady, magnetic force. The space between us was a live wire. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to pull back, to make a joke, to stand up and say I should go. My vows of solitude, my fear of another storm, my carefully constructed walls, they were all chanting a litany of retreat. But my body wouldn't listen. It was leaning toward her, a flower turning toward the sun. I was so tired of the cold. So tired of the gray. She slowly lifted a hand, not to touch me, but just to hover in the air near my face. A question. An offering. Her fingers were stained with charcoal, and the sight was unbearably intimate. I could feel the heat from her palm on my skin, even without contact. My tears had stopped. All that was left was this raw, terrifying, exhilarating tension. Chloe, she whispered, and my name on her lips was a revelation. It sounded new. I couldn't speak. I just watched her, my breath held tight in my chest. The world outside, the rain, the city, the university, Professor Albright and his tariffs, it had all faded away to a dull, distant roar. There was only this room, this small pocket of warmth and light, and the girl with sea glass eyes who saw right through me. And then my phone buzzed. The sound was obscene, a violent intrusion from another world. It buzzed again on the sofa cushion next to me, a persistent, demanding vibration. The spell was broken. We both flinched back as if startled by a loud noise. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking. The screen lit up with a picture of my older sister, Sarah. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown the phone across the room. But the habit of a lifetime, the ingrained need to answer when my family called, was too strong. I have to take this, I mumbled, not looking at Maya. I stood up, turning my back to her, and walked toward the window, creating a flimsy barrier of distance. I pressed the phone to my ear. Hey, Sarah. Chloe. Finally. I was about to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth, her voice chirped, too loud, too cheerful. How are things? Are you studying hard? Mom's been asking. Things are fine. I'm fine, I said, my voice flat. I stared out at the rain-streaked glass, at my own blurry reflection. Behind me, I could feel Maya's presence, a silent weight in the room. Just fine. You always say that. There was a pause. I knew what was coming. It was always what came next. Listen, I know things were rough with, you know. But you're not still moping around, are you? Have you met anyone? A nice boy from one of your classes, maybe. The phrase nice boy was a dagger, expertly thrown. Sarah knew I dated women. She knew about Amelia. She just refused to accept it, treating it like a phase, a rebellious quirk I would eventually outgrow. Every conversation was a gentle, persistent attempt to steer me back to the right path. I'm not looking for anyone, Sarah, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Oh, honey. You can't just give up on love. You're too young to be a spinster, she laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Please just tell me you're not repeating past mistakes. Mom is worried enough as it is. Another girl would just, it would be a lot for her right now. Every word was a brick, rebuilding the walls around me. Shame, hot and familiar, washed over me. The fear. The feeling of being wrong, of being a problem to be solved, a disappointment to be managed. This was my reality. This was the world outside of this warm, paint-scented apartment. A world that didn't have space for the feelings that were currently roaring through my veins. I have to go, I said, my voice choked. I'm busy. Chloe, wait. I hung up, cutting her off mid-sentence. I stood with my forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window, my breath fogging the pain. The entire, fragile bubble of the afternoon had burst, leaving me exposed and shaking. The tension that had been between Maya and me was gone, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. I had been a fool to let my guard down. This messy, complicated, judge thing, was who I was. And it was too much to ask anyone to step into. I turned around slowly, my apology already forming on my lips. I would thank her for the tea, for the shelter from the rain, and I would leave. I would go back to my island and reinforce the walls until no one, not even a girl with kind eyes and charcoal on her fingers, could ever get through again. But Maya wasn't in the armchair anymore. She was standing right behind me. She had been there the whole time, had heard every word. Her face wasn't filled with pity or judgment. It was filled with a fierce, protective anger that startled me. Don't you dare, she said, her voice low and intense. Don't I dare what? I whispered, my voice trembling. Don't you dare let her voice be the one you listen to right now. She took a step closer, closing the distance I had tried to create. She reached out, not hesitating this time, and gently took my phone from my nerveless fingers, placing it on the windowsill. Then her hands came up to cup my face, her thumbs stroking my cheeks, wiping away tears I hadn't even realized had started to fall again. Her touch was everything I had imagined, warm, firm, and impossibly soft. It was grounding. It was a lifeline. My family is complicated, I choked out. Everyone's family is complicated, she said, her eyes searching mine. That's their noise. Not yours. What do you hear right now, in this room? Just us. What do you want? The question hung in the air, simple and monumental. What did I want? I wanted to stop being afraid. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted to be in a place where I wasn't a past mistake or a source of worry. I wanted to feel the way I felt when she looked at me, not like a problem but like a person. Like a possibility. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned in, closing that last inch of space, and pressed my mouth to hers. The kiss was everything and nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a wild, desperate crash. It was soft. It was hesitant at first, a question. Her lips were gentle against mine, and for a heartbeat, that was all it was. Then, she answered. She kissed me back, a slow, deepening pressure that was full of a breathtaking certainty. Her hand slid from my face into my hair, holding me, grounding me. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her closer, and the world fell away. It was a kiss that tasted of tea and rain, and the lingering metallic scent of turpentine. It was a kiss that unraveled months of loneliness. It undid the damage of Sarah's words, of Amelia's storms, of my own punishing solitude. It wasn't a drama. It wasn't a tempest. It was quiet. It was steady. It was a shelter. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, her hair tickling my cheek. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I had ever known. "Oh," I breathed out, the single syllable holding a universe of meaning. "Yeah," she whispered back, a shaky laugh in her voice. "Oh." She pulled back just enough to look at me, her green eyes luminous in the dim light. A small, genuine smile played on her lips, the one that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. So much for counting ceiling tiles. A laugh escaped me, a real, unburdened sound that felt like it came from a stranger. It was light. It was happy. Two simple, welcome moments of levity after the emotional cascade. "Yeah," I agreed, my own smile feeling wide and unfamiliar on my face. "This is definitely better than tariffs." In that moment, holding onto her in the quiet of her messy, wonderful apartment, I felt the foundations of my island start to crumble, not in a flood, but like sandcastles at high tide, gently and inevitably giving way to something warmer and infinitely more vast. The vow I had made to myself was broken. And I had never been so grateful for a broken promise in my entire life. We didn't talk for a while after that. We just stood by the window, wrapped in a comfortable silence, my head resting on her shoulder, as we watched the rain slow to a drizzle. The city lights smeared across the wet darkness, beautiful and distant. Her arms were around my waist, a warm, solid presence that made me feel anchored. I had spent so long feeling like a ship tossed in a storm, and for the first time, I felt like I had found a harbor. I replayed the phone call with my sister in my head, but the words had lost their sting. Held here, in the reality of Maya's arms, Sarah's anxieties, and my mother's worries seemed like noise from a faraway station, faint and staticky. Maya had been right. It was their noise, not mine. The only thing that felt real was the steady beat of her heart against my ear, and the lingering taste of her on my lips. I was so scared, I admitted into the fabric of her sweater. It smelled like her, that calming scent of sandalwood and paper. "Me too," she confessed, her voice a low rumble. I lifted my head to look at her. "You? Of what?" "Of you walking out that door," she said, her expression serious. "Of you believing that what your sister said was the truth. That this," she gestured between us, "is a mistake." The power imbalance wasn't one of money or status, but of emotional readiness. I had been so convinced I was the damaged one, the one with all the baggage, that I hadn't considered she might have her own fears, her own vulnerabilities. She had been patient, yes, but it wasn't the patience of someone who had nothing to lose. It was the patience of someone who saw something worth waiting for, and was terrified it might slip away. "It isn't a mistake," I said, the words feeling like the truest thing I had ever spoken. "It's the first thing that's felt right in a very long time." Her relief was a visible thing, a softening of her shoulders, a deep breath that she let out slowly. She leaned in and gave me another kiss, this one quicker, softer, a sweet affirmation. We eventually migrated to the lopsided sofa, sitting close together, our legs tangled. I told her everything about Amelia then, the details I'd left out before, the ugly parts one was ashamed of. She listened without judgment, her thumb drawing slow, soothing circles on the back of my hand. In return, she told me more about Claire. About how their intensity had burned bright and fast, leaving them both scorched. She had loved her, but she had lost herself in the process, her art suffering, her friendships fraying. "It took me a year to feel like myself again," she said, her gaze distant. "To remember that love is supposed to build you up, not hollow you out." We were two sides of the same coin, hurt by different kinds of storms, but left with the same fear of the rain. Sharing our stories, we weren't just exchanging backstory, we were mapping our wounds for each other, showing the places that were still tender. It was an act of profound trust. As the night deepened, a plan began to form, not a grand declaration, but a series of small, concrete steps. A plan for us. "I don't want this to just be a rainy afternoon," I said, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "Good," she replied immediately. "Because I was about to ask you on a proper date. One that doesn't involve academic truancy." I laughed. "I think I'd like that. But first," she said, her tone shifting slightly. She reached over and gently took my phone from the windowsill where she'd left it. She held it out to me. "You should do something for yourself." "Not for me. For you." I knew what she meant. My thumb hovered over my contacts list, over Amelia's name. It had been there for 6 months, a toxic monument I couldn't bring myself to demolish. I would scroll past it, and every time, it was a small gut punch, a reminder of the failure I looked at Maya, at her steady, supportive gaze. She wasn't telling me what to do, just giving me the space to do it. My finger moved. I pressed her name, then the option to block and then delete. The prompts came up. Are you sure? This action cannot be undone. I pressed yes. It was gone. Just like that. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. It was a simple, digital act, but it felt like an exorcism. I was severing the last tie. I was choosing my future over my past. Done, I whispered. She smiled and took the phone, setting it aside again. Good. We made a plan for our date. A gallery opening she wanted to see on Friday. She would cook dinner at her place first. It was simple, real, and blessedly free of drama. It was a start. A quiet, hopeful beginning. As I finally prepared to leave, long after the rain had stopped, she walked me to the door. Wait, she said, and disappeared for a moment, returning with a small, beautiful object. It was a smooth, gray stone, worn by water, and on its flat surface, she had drawn a tiny, perfect sketch of the two of us huddled under the umbrella, just our silhouettes against the rain. I saw this on my walk this morning, she said, pressing it into my hand. It was still warm from her pocket. I thought it looked like it was waiting for a story. I closed my fingers around it, the weight of it solid and real in my palm. It was a captured moment, but not one meant to be trapped. It was a beginning. A promise. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I leaned in and kissed her one last time, a gentle press of lips that spoke of gratitude and hope. Walking back to my dorm under the now clear, star-dusted sky, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air was clean and cold, washed new by the rain. I was no longer an island. I was part of a continent, connected by a bridge I hadn't even known I was looking for. The stone was a heavy, comforting weight in my pocket, a tangible piece of a day that had changed everything. I hadn't just skipped a lecture. I had skipped ahead to the next chapter of my life. I stepped into my quiet dorm room, a space that had so long felt like a fortress of solitude. But tonight, it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I placed the small, painted stone on my bedside table, a new landmark in the landscape of my life. The future was still uncertain. I didn't know what would happen with my family, or how this fragile, beautiful new thing with Maya would grow. But for the first time, the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an open page, waiting for a story. My story. And I was finally ready to start writing it. When you've built your entire world around the certainty of being alone, how terrifying and wonderful is it to let someone hand you the plans for a new one? If you found yourself wanting Chloe and Maya to find their way, and believe in the quiet power of a connection that heals, please like this story, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments below.